Okay, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. For the record, thanks Sudarshan and Vikas for joining today. So we're going to go through some questions, high-level questions on integration, APIs, and challenges, opportunities, etc. So I would like to pick your brains on those topics, and you can share your experience and what you learned, how to solve the problems. So no, it'll be useful for the community. So I know you purchased integration platform solution at your firm. I know for various reasons, for various business outcomes that you wanted to achieve. What were some of the drivers you were looking at? When you decided that you needed an integration platform, iPaaS solution like MuleSoft. So it'll be useful for a lot of customers. I know a lot of leaders, especially because integration is it's a universal challenge, and everybody faces that. And the common question that I have seen with my customers is when to decide, should I develop in-house or should I go for a solution integration platform? So what were your drivers when you purchased MuleSoft or other integration platforms? So one of you can start, like Vikas. I'll go with you first.
Sure. Yeah. So we are actually mostly doing a digital transformation. So State Auto. So I use MuleSoft at State Auto, and currently we are looking to export some. That's different. So MuleSoft I use at State Auto, and prior to as well I was using MuleSoft at Gap when I was there for short time. And what we were looking for is more digital transformation. So State Auto is like a 100-year-old company. They're kind of completing their 100 years this year, 2021. And they have a monolithic legacy application, which is mostly mainframe AS400. And it's like one giant system, which has like one giant database, and then a lot of files coming in, file going out. So we looked at that, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to do digital. Just wanted to do. So what we kind of ask ourselves is, okay, start building web services in-house here and there. Some of them will be in .NET because we have .NET programmers. Some of them could be in Java. What we did, okay, let's kind of analyze that. We kind of, as an architect, okay, let's see where we want to go, because we don't want to create thousands of services on different technologies and kind of not understand the operational aspect of it and how do we train that developer. So we Apogee soft, and the MuleSoft came actually on the top. The reason for that was mostly as a SaaS product, because we were looking for something cloud-based as a PaaS or a SaaS. So when I say PaaS or SaaS means do infrastructure business, so that we kind of focus on our core business in digital transformation, rather than worrying about servers, upgrade, patching, things like that. The other aspect was that we have a common platform across offshore and on-site. So when I say common platform, means like the MuleSoft Visual Studio, which provides you IDE where you can check out the code, you build your integration flows, you check in, and you DevOps, you deploy. We want our cycle time. So when I say cycle time, means a lot of time when you have some integration requirements, you kind of go through the requirements, you identify the builders, you do design, you build, you deploy, you come back again and you fix it. Where we wanted to basically use the cycle time from start to finish so that we can quickly, within 2 years. So State Auto actually transformed their all states, which is like 32 states we are in, all the states insurance from their mainframe to this digital platform in. And I just to give you the comparison, because I was also at Nationwide for 2 states there for 7 years. So in terms of the transformation, in terms of the speed, the question about the iPaaS is that we don't have to worry about infrastructure. We don't have to worry about your security of infrastructure. You don't have to worry about things. You just go and subscribe to your course. You select, you deploy. You have the platform, you deploy. Any security patches applied. So it helps us to focus on the core business rather than worry about infrastructure or any other thing. So that was the main reason.
Awesome, thank you. And you brought up some good points. I'll cover once Sudarshan shares his thoughts. So Sudarshan.
Sure.
Sure. I would echo what Vikas said in terms of the cycle time and the agility, right? But if I have to paint the picture a little bit differently, in terms of using an integration platform, in earlier days, if you looked at it, if you take an organization, you basically have internal entities. What I mean by internal entities is you have employees, processes, and applications. And then you have the external entities, which are basically your suppliers, vendors you integrate with. In I would say in the earlier days, right, the rate of change or the complexity of integration between the external entities and the internal entities or the organizations was, I would call it would move at a very slow pace, right? So the intent of having point-to-point connectivity or the kind of integrations you had were not that demanding. The same thing was in the internal side, like you had systems which would connect. There was not much demand in terms of, I would say, process efficiency, which you see along with digital transformation initiatives, where you want to find out your bad processes and digitize as much as possible, automate as much as possible. So that integration demand was not that much. But as things have evolved, the number of integrators you have for a specific organization, for a specific set of business capability has gone up exponentially, right? The management, the proliferation of integration has gone up to a great extent. And that's where an integration platform basically comes and helps you, right? Like you have one umbrella under which you can manage all your integrations. Things with MuleSoft and other tools, right? Like you have the connectors, the speed at which you develop integration with your external services becomes faster. Let it be Salesforce, let it be Oracle Fusion or whatever it is. So you have to basically start looking from when you start looking at it from that perspective. It's like, okay, how many external entities am I integrating to? How can I have a good control on those integration points? At the same time, not making it a spider web where it gets out of control. That's at least one of those drivers, along with the digital transformation, right? Where I have at least experienced where people are or the organizations are heading towards the integration platform. And then based on their maturity and how much they want to take on, they usually hover between going the iPaaS route or using just as an integration platform completely managed by them. Um,
Yep.
Good call.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the exact points. I think no, if you see the core business, their core business is not to develop integrations. Your business is to know develop the build the digital transformation or no business products, right? Why would you spend time and effort in building a connectivity to an external system or internal system? That's a waste of time. So the technology will change tomorrow. If you purchase a different system, you will have to start all over. Why will you waste your resources to build all the connectivity to various systems? So that's where the iPaaS integration platform comes into picture handy. So it comes with out of the box features to connect to various systems. It takes care of analytics management, all the features that you would need, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And as you said, right, it gives you complete control over all the integration points, and it's no well established, well proven. So there's no point in reinventing the wheel or no to do something that's already available. It makes no perfect common sense to go for an integration platform if you have no certain needs. Totally agree with you both, and thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Moving on. So we touched on this. No, it may be a more redundant question. How does integration platform like MuleSoft help digital transformation? We just saw in your response, know how it helped your organization in quickly developing integrations to solving business outcomes, which is to transform digitally and also to modernize the platforms. Right nowadays, everybody's talking about SOAP service like SOAP, REST APIs, and all integrations that possible to like other internal systems, external systems, vendors, partners, B2B or B2C or whatever you want to call it. You have integration needs, and MuleSoft has connectors, and I'm sure that's the one of the reasons why people will go for MuleSoft or no other tools which has like 200 connectors out of the box. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I'm going to skip this question unless you have additional thoughts. If you have, no, please share. But otherwise, no, I think we touched upon the same
So
question.
yeah, I do want to add actually on this one, because so the digital transformation is one side, and how do you realize that? And the way I see it, the digital transformation is actually automation. So if you look at, they kind of rely on a lot. They're building this digital platform which is consumer centric, like it helps consumers to do the service. But actually, it is just an integration between so many entities, so to speak. So when we talk about digital transformation, we are kind of going into microservices world and things like that, so where this helps the MuleSoft or any integration platform get you up to speed faster.
Right. Exactly. Okay, if I want to ask you a question, why did you pick MuleSoft? There are so many vendors. What were the reasons why you picked MuleSoft? Like how were you able to achieve your visions and goals with the like no, or what were the things that you wanted to achieve with an integration platform? I know the need for integration platform. We just saw that, but why MuleSoft in your case?
I can go first, or Sudarshan can go first, but we actually looked at a couple of platforms. So like 4 or 5 years back, and we did a POC also, and we kind of do assessment on so many factors. So I must say that MuleSoft has one of the greatest documentation online. Yeah, when you have an account and when you log in, so like easy to follow. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that, as I talked about, that we wanted to have a consistent build approach or design approach when we talk about off. And when we saw MuleSoft has the Visual Studio, how developers go and build the integration, it was consistent. Otherwise, I have seen my previous experience that you have an offshore team which is building something, and then you have to go and redo again some part of it, not all of it, here again, because it doesn't meet the specification, how things should be aligned, what connectors should be using, how do we connect to the JDBC database, things like that. I mean, they're small things, but what protocol do you use to call APIs? So there's a lot, I would say, configuration-based thing which comes with Visual Studio, how things are deployed, almost everybody's thing, how things are kind of reported, log management, and there are a lot of things which are kind of consistent. When you some other things, we did look at that. It's a very strong platform, but there's no build and design kind of things put like is part of that overall package, so to speak, or overall platform. So in that sense, we kind of talked about that, and we say, okay, let's go with MuleSoft, because it's not just building an API, it's also building the processes and how people actually engage with that design and build process.
Well said. Okay, thank you. Sudarshan, your thoughts?
Sure. So for us, it was a couple of things. When we started looking at integration platforms, we basically broke into two kind of buckets, right? There is the API management side of the house. So we basically looked at, from an integration perspective, if you have just APIs and you want to manage those APIs, what are the tool sets? And then we looked at holistically, if you want to have a true integration platform, what is that going to look like, right? When it comes to MuleSoft and some other competitors for MuleSoft, they provide both the integration aspect of it as well as the API management aspect of it. Some of the driving factors for us, similar to what Vikas said, is we went through we shortlisted based on certain criteria. We did POCs and we landed to MuleSoft. But from a high level, if I have to chalk out the usability of the tool, for the developers, right? How easy it is to use both the development platform as well as the management plane. The second aspect of it is like, okay, what kind of capabilities can I enable through using that integration platform? What I mean by that is, I think Rob alluded to that, is the number of connectors which you get out of the box and for which we are not paying a premium, right? So as you compare the different integration tools, some of the basic connectors with other competitors, you're going to get charged, right? Or they are not available. So based on the use cases which we had, for us, it was like things like, okay, can I connect to the multi-cloud like Amazon or Azure? Can I connect to some of the SaaS providers like Workday, Oracle, or Salesforce? And am I paying a premium for it? Things like, can it do EDI? Can it do some basic batch? So those were some of the criteria which we had for that. The third was in terms of the deployment option. Are we getting forced into deploying the platform in one way or the other? The more flexibility, we wanted to have some kind of a flexibility around that, which MuleSoft provided. The fourth one, obviously, the cost, right? What is the cost associated of owning the integration platform and managing it, right? The total cost of ownership. And finally, it was support, whether it is support through documentations, the community, or through the support which MuleSoft provides part of the contract. So those were some of the, I would call that there is more work which went into uh, identifying a tool and finally landing on MuleSoft. But at a high level, those were, I would say, called the guiding principles which led us in selecting MuleSoft.
Awesome. So were you able to achieve those visions and goals that you had with the platform, with the tool?
I would basically break it. It's going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I'm going to say yes and no. What I mean by that is it did give us a majority of the things which we had envisioned, right? So in terms of the capabilities, um, speed of development, and all kind of things, there were a few things which I think, like any other, it I won't say it's just with MuleSoft. It's with any other tool I have worked with. I'm working with a different set of tools now also. Things like the CI/CD deployment pipeline. I think MuleSoft has come a long way since Ram, you and I implemented it, right? Like I do see the Catalyst program, and I see a lot of documentation coming out there, and the community adding a lot of value to that. But at least when we implemented it, I found there was gap around those kind of things, which basically when you want to speed up the process, there were gaps. But I have seen, again, back to my thing, is like the Catalyst program has been really helpful. I see some of the gaps being caught up, and as the tool itself matures and the community itself matures, I think it would help a lot. Overall, I would say from a vision and a goal perspective, we achieved what we set out to, around 70% of it. There were few things, again, as I said, like it was not a tool deficiency per se, but it was more of a tool plus process deficiency, as well as other things which I would say hindered us from hitting our 100% mark.
Right. And also, if you look at the skill set that's available in the market, you can easily find a MuleSoft resource. There are so many people using MuleSoft, and if you want to hire somebody or look for a consulting company to do the development work, it's easy to find people with that skill set these days than it was before. So
Yep.
that's also something that I'm seeing.
Yeah, it was not that easy to find a MuleSoft, but over a period of time, actually, you like when you put a job posting, you get like multiple resumes. It was hard to get earlier, like maybe one or two at the max.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Doesn't matter whether you're using MuleSoft or Apigee or Delbumi or TIPCO. What were your top integration challenges, right? And like, no, I'm sure security can be one of the top integration challenge for many of us. I've seen that with many of my customers, and I want to pick your brains on what were your challenges when you implemented when you built all the integrations to your internal and external entities, and what were some of the things that you did to solve them? Like how did you approach them? So I mean, you can think of a high level topmost challenge that you had and how you solved it. So it'll help the
Sure.
community to understand know what they can expect when they implement. What are the things that they can expect as a challenge, and how to go about solving them. So that's the intent.
Sure. Uh, Overall, what we saw both at State Auto and previously also, regardless of MuleSoft, is like homegrown custom integrations. People are using multiple technologies, with whether it's XSLT and Camel or something like that. They just all combined. And everybody likes to write the code, and everybody likes their own code. And if I give somebody else my code, they won't like it. That's the reality of the developer. So when you have this homegrown custom integrations, when you have people writing their own code, and they're using different libraries, and they just go on something and just import it and build it. But when support, like, okay, is it supported? Maybe it's out of the thing. Like, we don't know what is there. There are a lot of things which also comes from Apache. It's not. So homegrown custom integration was one of the biggest things which for a period of time, like how do we remediate that? Whether it's out of support, nobody's supporting it.
Correct.
There was another was a point-to-point integration. So if you have let's system X to system Y, and system Y could be vendor system or could be internal systems, but if a system X change a little bit, then entire your supply chain is kind of broken because it's point-to-point. If thing change, so you want to have more loose coupling between systems so that you know exactly where the transformation is that you do in your integration, rather than just point to point. One of the biggest challenge we had was operational. We were not able to, before MuleSoft, we were not able to gauge that thing because it was just mostly homegrown. Which API or which web service is actually being used heavily, which is not. How do we balance that? How do we know which is what is broken, what is not broken, and consistent that reporting aspect. The other thing which I would say was design and development. Prior to MuleSoft, we used to spend a lot of time in design, and then go to the stuff. You have a business requirement. You go to the things work. It's like a flow based, right? You just have the milestone and you just build and deploy that. So that I come back to the same point. The cycle time is like reduced. Hands off between different teams because they're all using some team is using Java and some other things. So many teams using many different technologies are also another challenge across State Auto.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, these are all very no, not unique to State Auto, I would say. No, definitely a lot of customers can echo that, and a lot of them can see that that's happening in their organization as well. Sudarshan?
I think Vikas covered most of it. I'm trying to see what I need to do. The biggest thing for from an integration challenge, whether it's in my prior or even my existing role, is what I've seen is choosing the right architecture. Right. What I mean by that is if you want to integrate a source and a destination, right, whether it be two internal applications or it's with an external provider, you have to try to choose the right architecture. Know your source and know your destination, right? Know how the data is being transmitted, transformed, what are the needs, understand things like latency, understand things like resiliency. The homework needs to happen upfront, right? It's not a tool issue. It's basically there are a lot of prep work which goes into designing an integration between two systems. The challenge which I have seen, I'm going to give an example. I'm not going to quote anybody on this. So we basically had an integration between two applications, right? The integration mechanism was using IBM MQ, a critical set of data which gets passed between system A to system B. The way it was designed is system A talks to MQ, um, irrespective of whether they get a good response or not, they keep on proceeding, right? Um, from an integration perspective, they did not think, okay, what happens if the queue is down? What happens if they get an error code back, and all those kind of things. So that's what I mean by choosing the right architecture is always a challenge, at least making people think there are different aspects of performing an integration task between whether it be applications or systems. Getting that right is always important. And knowing it, and then making sure that you have traceability or visibility to each hop. That's another thing which we basically ignore. Is it's like a handoff, right? My job is to take the ball, give it to somebody else, and I don't care what happens with it. Uh, to build that entire traceability for your integration lifecycle, that is very important. Those are the two things which I have seen missing um, in most of my experience, where the homework is not done upfront, and then the monitoring and logging pieces around your integration component is always an afterthought.
Okay, perfect. And what do you guys think about thinking of integration as building blocks, right? As not as a, like you mentioned, point-to-point integration, so integration between two systems, and in many cases we would integrate with the same system in multiple ways, right? Multiple use cases. So traditionally we used to build multiple integration flows to the same system, right? We would do the same thing, repeat the same thing. But these days, the value add, at least, is thinking integration as a building block instead of thinking it as a point-to-point integration. You break it down into multiple blocks, like a Lego block, and then you assemble them to create an application, right? So that you can assemble them in any way you want, uh, so that you can reuse the blocks. I would say reuse the components, whether it's a schema, whether it's an API, whether it's a piece of code that you want to reuse. You can think of reuse in many aspects. So in many cases, many firms spend a lot of time in developing integrations. They solve this problem. I mean, there are a million ways you can solve an integration problem, right, efficiently. But what is no what's a better way? There is always something that's better than the others. So is building point-to-point integrations 100 times is better than reusing the same blocks 100 times. So that's very common sense, right? It's a no-brainer that to think in that way, right? If I write a piece of code which can be reused in many of my flows, I would go for that. So I develop only once, I reuse it in multiple times, and to save cost and time, whether it's development or testing or whatever it is. And it's also proven, right? It's performing. I've tested the performance of that component. I don't need to worry about it. I know it performs and stuff like that. So all these no adds value. When you think about the challenges, I think these are some of the challenges that I constantly hear from my customers saying, okay, we have no integrations to Salesforce, and 5 systems connect to Salesforce, and there is a governor limits. There are no lot of things that you have to consider when you deal with Salesforce. How do you manage that? How do you throttle that? How do you control all the integration points? I think developing an API for Salesforce, for example, and letting everybody use the same API to talk to Salesforce will give you a greater control over. So I'm just throwing an example, but these are some of the challenges that you can solve. You can expect, right? Performance, stability. You brought up all these no key things that you would see. Connectivity, logging, monitoring. So these are all the challenges that I've seen also with my customers, where an integration platform like MuleSoft will solve the problem 50% of the time, but rest 50% is all about your architecture, your design, your choice of your choice on how to use the product. So don't blame it on the product. It's all product is only there to enable you, but you have to design it properly, use it properly, and design it properly also.
And just to add to what Rami said, actually, the building blocks, and that's how I consider actually when I'm building my integrations. I see integrations as a capability. You know, when I say capability, that okay, let's just you're sending an email or you're sending a text message. Let's say you're building an API for think those integration as a capability. So you can use that capability or your API or your integration, whatever you call that, in multiple places. You can use it. You can plug it that into your digital online. You can send a text. So think those integration as a capability, and then build around that as an API or microservices, whatever you call that, so that it's like a building block. You can reuse in other flows, in other experiences.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Considering there are legacy systems and new modern systems in your organization, how do you utilize MuleSoft or any integration platform to manage trade-offs, adoptions, and time to market delivery? So what I mean by this is you have a choice, right? You have no connectivity options. You have no different requirements for connectivity between legacy and modern systems, and you can solve the problem by okay, a mainframe will use this technology to develop or create the data, and my modern systems will use this. So you can have a mix of technologies, mix of products to solve a problem. But how do you think how can you use a product like MuleSoft to manage all these differences and quickly adopt to the newer approaches and still don't develop the integrations on time to market delivery?
Sure, I can go. Yeah. So as in the last question, I think so. Dustin was talking about that. The architecture is important. When you select a platform like we actually kind of embrace across development teams, across architecture teams, and across business teams, that we want to go into this microservices architecture. Once we have that buy-in from business, from infrastructure, so microservice architecture, that's where the teams start to come and they start to realize that okay, what is the benefit? The communication is the key. Communication. You need to communicate, because what happens a lot of time, I've seen people working in other point-to-point integrations or .NET. When you bring up MuleSoft in front of them and they don't understand this, or they don't make, it's not that they don't like this, they don't have the knowledge or experience, they tend to go away from that. Whether it's MuleSoft or whether it's TIBCO. It's very important as the lead developer or as a technical expertise or whatever you call it. We need to basically we have to make sure that we understand without going into technical details that this is how this will solve the problem. This is how we'll kind of orchestrate our sharing of data, sharing my business APIs, and this is how it will provide the value. So that's the key. And talking about the legacy applications, we kind of did not actually rewrite thing. We say okay, we'll peel off rather than just doing the whole thing at a time. We say okay, let's build something new, deploy that, learn from it, and then come back again and iterate. So just to do and kind of get the confidence.
Right. And I'm sure, Sudarshan, you have a lot of experience in this space also, in banks and other places. So how did you deal with that?
I think the approach which at least I've been part of, or what I have taken, is it's very simple, right? Like you don't need to boil the ocean day one. Not everything which is running is bad, right? Just because you have a new platform. And it's all about showing that quick wins, right? For example, when you have a tool like MuleSoft, and when you bring in the tools, like Vikas said, there is always little bit of within the organization, you're always going to get a pushback, especially when you have an in-house development team who's comfortable with using some of the technologies like a .NET or a Java. The first reaction is always going to be, you're going to run into two questions. It's like, I'm going to use a technology which I'm comfortable with. The second thing is like, why do I need to change, right? So that is always there. So as long as we are able to show what I call the quick wins by using the platform, MuleSoft or whatever it is, to say why we are looking at it from a different perspective. The second thing is, I think from a messaging perspective, from a marketing perspective, it is always imperative that it is clearly understood to the dev teams and to the business why the platform is there, right? Especially from an adoption perspective. Where I have seen gaps is a tool has been brought in, but most of the people don't understand why the tool is there, right? They think like, okay, it's been bought, it's been pushed down our throat from top down. We do not understand things are working perfectly. It's another tool set, right? So the messaging has to be I think there's a lot of effort which needs to go into messaging, and it has to be constant. Like it's not a one-time thing. In terms of the time to market delivery, I think, as I said, like don't try to boil the ocean. Take small use cases. Get your feet wet with these tools. Take um, practical examples which you can deliver quickly. For one of the examples which I would take is we basically had a scenario where we were integrating with a third-party system. We were getting some data which we had to create an orchestration service. We could have done it two ways. We could have built it on .NET, or we could have used MuleSoft, where we were getting some data. We had to scan the data, store it at different places, and initiate something. So we took that use case and we basically built on MuleSoft. And one of the things is what the business was happy is like how quickly we were able to deliver, right? The churn, the runtime on delivering something on MuleSoft compared to what it would have taken to build from scratch on a .NET or a Java platform. The small wins helps the business, and it also helps the teams who are developing on MuleSoft gain confidence and get the comfort around it. Um, I would say bringing in any tool, especially when it is not greenfield, right? Like I don't think, in all honesty, there is no organization which day one starts with an integration platform. It's a startup company which starts with integration platform. Majority of the cases, you already have applications running, people comfortable with skill sets and tools. So it's basically a combination of multiple things. And the onus is, as Vikas said, it's the leadership has certain responsibilities. The architecture team has certain responsibilities, as well as the leads, right? So I would say it's a collective thing. To make a program of bringing MuleSoft or a Delbumi, making it successful within an organization.
Well said. Thank you. And that's a common theme that's across all these companies, right? Whether it's any vertical, irrespective of the vertical, I think integration is a common problem that everybody deals with. And these are the situations that you explained, right? When you buy in a new product, how do you adopt? Adoption is something that people struggle with, and because people are used to developing in a certain way and they don't want to change. It's always there is a that's why we call champions of change, right? It's hard to change for better. Always because we are comfortable doing some certain things. It's a mindset. So we should not think it as a threatening at all. We should look at it as an opportunity to learn something new and move on, right? It's a new technology to learn, additional skill set that you're going to gain. So if you have that mindset, it helps the leaders as well. So it's all leaders have to show the way, but the rest of the organization has to also show interest. It's always a challenge, but interesting to see how you approached it. Thank you. So you have, as I said, right, you have multiple ways to solve a problem, an integration problem. So if you leave it to developers, for example, connecting to Salesforce or connecting to Workday or whatever, they can develop in certain way, which may not be the best approach. And if you give it the same requirement to a different developer, he would use a different pattern altogether. Like, how do you make sure that you bring standardization in your organization One is for consistency, and one second one is no, so you can repeat the process quickly, efficiently. You can develop the integrations, which is a proven pattern, and also no proven in the sense no for performance, security, stability, and the best way to connect to a system. How do you avoid anti-patterns? Like no, what kind of controls can you think of that an organization should have when dealing with integration patterns? What level of control you can have, and at the same time you don't want to demotivate your teams too. So what kind of flexibility can you give your teams, at the same time maintain the consistency? Anyone?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So took a different even though anti-pattern is, it doesn't mean that you cannot develop it. Sometimes you have to do that. So that's what we said. We said it's a speed to market, go ahead, deploy and refactor, learn from that, and then do that. So that's the thing we say. There's a very good book about enterprise integrations patterns. We kind of discussed in a forum. So like lead tech lead developers, we had like forum about just talk about integration patterns, regardless of MuleSoft or any other thing. So I'll send the link. Actually, it's a very good book, and also it's called Enterprise Integration Patterns.com, and it talks about messaging, circuit breakers. There's a lot of things is there. How do you do wiretap, and there's a lot of things are there. Just bring it up. Team was very excited. When I say team, means designer and developers, that to learn that whole knowledge about that, because that knowledge you can apply to anywhere you want, whether you're writing a MuleSoft code or non-MuleSoft code. So that's one thing they kind of discuss with the team. The other thing is that we have some tools, Sonar Cube, look at that, lines of code, and those a developer is writing 5,000 lines of code. It's a kind of anti-pattern. Yes, it works, but it's like anti-pattern. So Sonar Cube and team, discussions, make sure that they understand that yes, it's good the code, but at the end of the day, as a developer, when you write the code, you should feel good and go home rather than say, "Oh, I did a crap job." So I think that giving opportunity to developers and kind of let them feel good about what they write, and make sure that they rather than squashing them, give them an opportunity to learn more. I think that was the idea.
Awesome. Sudarshan, how did you handle this at the SafeLight and other places?
It's going to be a funny answer, but I'm going to say, to avoid an anti-pattern, create a pattern, right? What I mean by that is, if you don't want people to do something wrong, or you want to follow them or have people follow a specific guidelines or a template, create those templates and give it to the developers, right? So you basically create scaffolding for all your use cases. A majority of the use cases, again, you cannot foresee what kind of integration challenge you'll have in the future, but spend the time upfront when you bring in these tools, right, to identify your integration use cases, then create templates which the developers can use, right? It's a scaffolding. You're not spoon feeding, but you're giving them a scaffold, a template which they start with, and make sure like throughout the organization, that's what's being used and that's consistent, right? So when somebody integrates to a Salesforce, they know, okay, these are the basic flows to the thing which you mentioned, a shared flow, right? They use the same shared flow pattern across, right? So it's not unless something changes, they are using the same pattern. So that's one way of doing it. The second thing is to avoid anti-patterns is you need to have good governance in your complete life cycle of API development, or your whatever you're in MuleSoft, everything is an API. So in your life cycle, what I mean by that is the templates which they use, they are using their templates. If they're creating something new, let it go in front of, I won't call it an ARB, sometimes it sounds heavy, but in terms of the leads. Second thing is when you check in the code, make sure you have tools and controls in place which can go through what you're doing and make sure like you're not introducing something which is against your guidance, right? Whether it is validating against your spec, having tests, all those kind of things. So it's a combination of both. Make it easier for the developers, right? So when we say we don't want them to reinvent the wheel, make sure you give them a template so that they are not reinventing the wheel. At the same time, add it with the governance, right? Your check-in process, your approval process, all those kind of things. Make sure like you have certain guardrails in place which would prevent this from happening. But my experience has been it is like make it easier for the developers. As I said, like if we create templates, give access to them so that way they know where to start, at least to begin with. At the same time, you're not crushing their creativity, right? So they can do, they can build on it, but at the same time, there is a standard which is being followed.
Right. And no, a pattern that makes sense to you, maybe felt differently by other person, right? A different company, for example, that they may have a different pattern and you may have a different pattern. Let's assume that a company has multiple vendors, doing multiple integration projects, multiple contractors, multiple consulting companies, offshore or on-site model. They're going to follow different patterns. And I've seen this, I'm seeing this constantly with my customers also, right? They have Deloitte, they have TCS, they have other firms doing bits and pieces of their integration work. So everybody follows their own patterns, and it becomes really a big challenge for the organization to bring everybody into the same thought process. Because you give the project to them, they're going to build based on their patterns. So as a company, you should have no control over governance is the key. The team, you can say, okay, to any consulting company that's going to do the development work, okay, this is our template. Follow this for when you develop the integration flows. So you can do that, and at the same time, you can have a good governance, a good code coverage tools like SonarQube to detect some of them, but governance and code reviews, design reviews can help with anti-patterns too. But it becomes after the fact that it was already done. So you can avoid it, but you can prevent it from going into production. But it will need, that means it needs a rework and redesign and all those stuff. But how do you avoid anti-patterns in the first place? You need to have some established, create a pattern, like you mentioned, right? Create a pattern, educate, publicize that with the other teams, have no show and tell, lunch and learns, all these brown bag sessions that you can conduct internally with the rest of the organization. So you can give them a picture of what, as an architecture team, what you're prescribing, what your expectations are, so that everybody is aware. Instead of dealing with project to project, you can enable the organization in various ways. You can have internal sessions to educate them and enable them. So that's something that we prescribe to customers.
I just want to add here, right? So in my organization where I work, I see C4E establishment to have a governance around how MuleSoft is operated with respect to security, or with respect to patterns, or with respect to DevOps, right? Or let's say you're setting up an organization, how exactly the best practices around the groups or any kind platform that you set up. I see C4E is a place where the governance can be established across the organization.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Naresh.
Yep, good call.
Okay. So we talked about building blocks, right? Having one, let's say you're building an integration between two systems, you can have different set of API. If you look at MuleSoft API-led approach, it talks about system API, process API, and experience API, right? For one integration. That means you're developing three components, you're assembling them, and you are creating a complete integration flow. Which doesn't mean that that you have to develop all three components for every integration. You can reuse many of them. So how do you strike a balance between the three-layered approach versus when you have a strict SLA and latency needs? How do you strike a balance? Like, what approach would you recommend? What are the benefits, pros and cons that you would see, and how do you manage the expectations?
You want to go first with this one this time?
Yeah, you are my senior, man. You can always go.
No problem. Hey, we look at that in terms of LA and latency, things like that. We kind of embrace the microservices architecture, and we said like big things like any monolithic application. So when I say we don't want to basically couple a lot of features and functionality, because that's sometimes they tend to. So once you start overloading your features, web service or whatever we call that, you're doing 15 things and becomes like anti-parent about like it just becomes a mess, uh, and it's also difficult to scale up because maybe one application which is checks your like your customer detail, but if you're sending a message, combine those two together, maybe you're checking your customer once, but you may be sending 100 messages. When you combine together, it becomes very difficult to scale up because you just too much money. So maybe you can scale up your messaging maybe 10 times, whereas your customer maybe just one time. So loosely coupled architecture, microservices architecture, and it kind of define the KPIs for each APIs and then measure that. That's how we kind of run through that. And of course, doing the load test as being auto, like we will set up the auto scale. So if anything goes up because of infrastructure, let it go up, and then it down, and then we are at least meeting the business need. It may be different expenses, but we're able to sustain the business. So that was our approach. Infrastructure is getting cheap, and writing a code and waiting for something to for redesigning and designing. Let's build it. Yeah, it will scale up, and that's where we meet the requirements.
Awesome. Perfect response.
Yeah.
You want to add anything, Sudarshan?
Sure. I would say what has worked for us is identifying the use case, right? What capability is being delivered, and what is the use case. What I mean by that is you need to understand your use case. For example, if you're doing, I'll take an example from the banking industry. If you're sitting in front of an ATM, your SLA becomes very critical, right? And if I'm doing 3 or 4 hops, and that is going to take a lot of time, I might want to rethink my architecture. Not to say that I want to get rid of and have a point-to-point connectivity, but know your use case, design accordingly. At the same time, I would say a challenge in a nice way, where you know that adding 3 layers or 2 layers of system, or having a system and a process API and an experience API would probably make sense long term. But um, if somebody comes and tells you like I want a 5-second SLA, try to understand why they need a 5-second SLA, right? Prod that, because everybody wants it ASAP, right? Especially when you sit in front of business, they are immediate like it needs to be super fast, and the question is like why, right? What is the customer experience, or what are we delivering, in a and not in a negative way, but prodding and trying to understand the use case which is being developed and which is being delivered. I think that helps. And be pragmatic, right? I always say to my architects and the people I work with is, there is the purist, there is the chaos, and somewhere in between is pragmatism. So try to understand your use case, try to be pragmatic. I think long term, in terms of, as Ram mentioned, in terms of reusability of those blocks, if it makes sense, I would say fight for it, and then try to see where the SLAs come into play, where the latencies come into play, those kind of aspects come into play, and then make a call, right? It's all, at the end of the day, it's all about good design, good architecture. So there is not one silver bullet. There are steps which you take, and as I said, like try to be pragmatic, which makes sense both for the IT organization as well as the business organization.
Very good. Thank you.
Hey, Ram, I can add a little bit here. Very good point, actually, Sudarshan and Vikas raised here, right? So it's important to understand the spirit behind API-led architecture. So oftentimes what happens is that spirit is lost in the terminology of system, experience, process API. Oftentimes when you are having discussions, the conversation gets hung up on, hey, whether this particular API is system API or process API or experience API, how do we design file integration, what type of API it is, right? So it's important to understand that MuleSoft doesn't require clean 3 tiers. So the spirit behind API-led architecture is design your loosely coupled applications. And if you follow that principle, you will automatically realize that you have a system API. They are connecting to backend systems. Process APIs are responsible for orchestration, aggregation type of scenarios, and experience APIs are your actual the third-party mobile application consumers or web application consumers are consuming, right? So in some cases, you might see that there will be 4 layers or 5 layers, depending on how complex your architecture is. It might even be only 2 layers, right? So it's important to understand the spirit behind the API-led architecture. Oftentimes, it's also illustrative. Take a pragmatic approach, as Sudarshan mentioned, from performance, latency, etc. perspective.
Thanks, Yogesh.
Thank you, Yogesh. Yeah, good point.
And by the way, thanks for joining, Yogesh. You had
Yeah,
other
sorry,
roles.
I couldn't join on time. Sorry about that.
No problem. And this is a very common question that anybody doing the integration work will have. How do you choose between enterprise data model versus bounded context? So should I have a common data model, a CDM, for every integration, or should I go with what that particular system needs? How do you decide, and what are the decision making factors for that?
We looked at is that, and it's many places actually, not just Teradata. Whenever we embrace this enterprise data model, we call about entities. Basically, whether you have customers, you have relationship, you have patients, you have things. So when we look at the APIs, because APIs are used at multiple levels, sometimes you may be just orchestrating multiple APIs into one, even though, and maybe using from vendor. So maybe they have the other attribute. So what we said, okay, high level, we kind of more lean toward the bounded context in this scenario, the data model, which is led by the API, what attributes are needed for that particular capability or feature. But most, if it is a system API, we say, okay, now system API, which are close to the system, they will represent more enterprise data model. Like, okay, this is get the customer info, get the address info, get some other things like how many emails. So those are more entities. But when it comes to the experience API or process API, which we decided, or we kind of lean towards more into bounded context of the API. In terms of we kind of said, okay, let's follow some standard header approach. Those were the only thing which we did, but it's pretty much which layer you are working on, what kind of data model suits at what layer. That's what we agreed upon.
Makes sense. Yeah. Sudarshan?
I think Vikas covered everything which I was going to say. But it's always a philosophical discussion between enterprise models and bounded context, right? One of the things from at least my recent experiences, what I have found is if you have a well-defined enterprise data model, use that as your start, and then apply filters to create your bounded context on the different layers, right? Which always helps. But if you don't have that data maturity and you don't have an enterprise model, I would say try to do the reverse of it, right? Started with a bounded context, try to keep it as lean as possible, which is to that problem domain, and then build on it. So depending upon where the organization is and how much effort has been spent into, I have seen it go both ways. For example, I can talk about Key, where we have enterprise data model. There is maturity in certain units, and the APIs which are being developed or the services which are being developed is basically a filter on those bounded context. And then there are organizations, again, which are relatively new, where there is not, I would say, any intent to spend that much effort, money on setting up an enterprise data model. They're going for the bounded, and the hope is as the maturity grows to see if it can fit into a enterprise model.
Right. And also, enterprise model saves you a lot of time from doing the rework, especially if the systems change, right? If the legacy system today and tomorrow you're replacing that with a modern system, or even external vendor, external system that you're dealing with today, it changes. Your model can remain the same if you come up with no, your own, like if you are dealing with customer data, right? If you define what a customer means to you, instead of not dealing with what that system tells you what the customer should look like, you can save a lot of time, no, lot of rework and um, no, development work. It also depends on the layer of API that you work with. So good call out there.
And hey, Raman, just to add, right, oftentimes there are also industry data models available which you can apply. So for generic enterprises, there is cloud information model, which gives you mechanism to define your account, product, opportunity, etc. entities. It's loosely based on Salesforce's data model. And if you move to say specific industries like healthcare, Fire
Right.
is a very good data model that can be used to define your own data model. Similarly, as open banking is becoming more and more common, they are defining how the customer will look like, how the account will look like, what are the specification for transaction data. So
Right.
those are some of the things. So you don't have to always start from scratch. You can take advantages of what industry is already doing in this space, and save your time and effort in
But
that.
I have a question, right? So, like, I have this confusion as well. Let's say telecom or fire. So when we start from the scratch, definitely we can have these reference. But in order to fit our requirement, let's say I need only 10 fields, right? But I see a data model with 100 fields. That's where the confusion. Should I go for it, or should I have my bounded context? In the long term, maybe it is good, but you know, can you just elaborate how I can go for it in these situations, right? When I'm starting at fresh.
I mean, personally, what I usually recommend my customers to do is think of your current requirement and go with it, but keep it flexible enough that tomorrow, if you want to say today, you will start with 10 fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow, keep a flexibility in your architecture to accommodate those 90 fields, but you don't have to build all 100 right now. Who is going to pay for that investment, right? That often becomes a problem. So there are some architecture principles, like you are not going to need it, why AGNI, right? So just think
Yeah.
from current perspective, but have a long term visibility how your architecture is going to evolve. And experienced architects, as Sudarshan mentioned, right, be pragmatic. So you don't have to stick to ideal that, hey, some industry is saying that you must have 100 fields, I must implement these 100 fields in my interface, and that's how I'm going to become compliant. Look at that data model or that guideline as sort of point of reference, take inspiration from it, and build as per your requirement.
Yeah, I like the word pragmatic to understand more practically. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And the one other thing which I would add is like you also have to take into account if you're bringing in COTS product, right? So if you are doing custom API development, custom build versus bringing in COT products, as the industry is maturing, like you would see most of these vendors tying themselves into one of these frameworks or standards, right? Which is then which gets translated into these enterprise data models. So there are a lot of things which go into I would say between selecting an enterprise model versus a bounded context. Um, Again, it's going to be use case by use case. So look at what you have within the enterprise, what's in the near future, or where the business wants to head, and then take that call.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, we talked about integrations, and nowadays, no, everybody's talking about APIs, right? They want to develop APIs as products. How do you think, and how do you make sure that the APIs that you build add the business value, right? It's not a technology value. It's not about no. Okay, I'm going to uh, change all the integrations. I'm going to build all REST APIs going forward, right? That's what is the business reason for that? How do you ensure that it adds value? When you everybody is talking about some kind of API program, and my question is, how do you ensure that it adds value to the business? Like how does it help the business? How do you ensure that?
So what we did actually when we built the API, we always kind of started with like a one pager. Like, why are we doing this API? What business problem? So that's one of the things which we kind of sat down with the business, forget about the data and things like that. What value are we going to provide? So we wrote one pager. Other thing which we did is like build KPIs. As we kind of identify the one pager, we also build the KPIs. Like what are the KPIs we want to measure? And once we deploy the code or the API, we kind of measure those APIs. Let's just say business said, okay, this API is going to be used, but if nobody's using that, we just wasted our money. So there's no value there in that. Kind of build, we deploy, measure the API, KPIs, and look at that. If they're not used, go back to the business. Okay, we built 15 APIs, and those force. What happens? Business also need to know this one, because what they can do, maybe they don't know. They can go back to their sales reps and they can start doing sales. So that's where we kind of like build KPIs, measure those things. We also had the built internally, which is kind of get that so that we can reconsume those API rather than building new ones. So there was a lot of effort done on that front as well.
Very good.
Yes. I was going to say something. We can thank Gartner for making the API first buzzword, right? So when you go to the business, all the business wants is the API. You are in a meeting and they're like, why don't you build an API for this, right? So that's how it's become. But in terms of the APIs itself and how you add value, as Vikas mentioned, it's all about the value proposition, right? Like, what are we trying to deliver? What is the capability we are trying to deliver? What is the problem we are trying to solve? And then the things which you mentioned earlier, right? Is it reusable? Is it extensible like a Lego block? Those are the things which add both value and agility to any business, right? If you're building something which is a monolithic, slow-moving, and the business cannot reuse it to a certain degree, or they cannot extend on it, we start losing the value. And it does not matter whether you're developing it on MuleSoft or you're doing a custom build. So as long as we adhere to those principles and understand what the business is asking for or what problem domain we are trying to solve, I think we can ensure that whatever is being built adds both agility as well as value.
Good.
Thank you. Good thoughts. I'm going to skip this. How do you address the security and governance challenges? Let's come back to this, but I have one more question before this. I'm going to know. Okay, so this is a common dilemma between a lot of customers that they have. How do you choose between a cloud deployment and on-prem deployment? I'm not talking about Cloud Hub, but no, when do you choose between a cloud deployment and when you want to manage the servers on your own? Like, what is the decision factor there? Like, how do you convince one way or the other?
So we actually had the data center in-house, and we, from an architecture perspective, and the infrastructure team, which is different, they love their fingers on the keyboard and installing a software or doing that one. They love Unix commands, things like that, which is, I like that, but that's the path. As I said, business wants IT to help and speed up their business goals. As a company, our goal is to get the business API or process or whatever the requirements is, just meet the requirement, build it, and support it. our job is not as an application architect or application developer, not focus on the details of how do you patch servers or those kind of things. So what we said, okay, let's basically focus on the business value. Do we have to go into this infrastructure management, acquire server, patch it every other night, Linux patch and this and that? So one factor was on-prem versus cloud was that we want to go into more. We don't care about infrastructure. We just go click, click, click. We have this API or this thing is ready. Speed to market was another thing. Important thing that we are ready to meet the business need. Future upgrade, go and deal with security patches and things like that, and any security updated or maybe delayed between a vendor package released, or we do it because we have to go and bring down something. That was another factor that we don't want to deal with that. So that's another thing. Auto scaling was another thing. If you have to do auto for certain events, you may be acquiring a lot of infrastructure and may not be using it all the time. Whereas if you go with the cloud or use it, comes down maybe instantly, and then go for it. So it's cost as well. So a lot of factors was there, and that's where we kind of embrace the cloud over on-prem, so that we don't have to manage the whole thing, just manage the more core features.
Thank you.
This is a very, as I said, like another philosophical debate these days, right? Cloud versus on-prem versus whether you want to manage your instances even on the cloud, or do you want to outsource the entire management. But if I have to speak on this, there are 4 or 5 factors which basically at least drives my thought process in determining whether I want to go on-prem or cloud. One is, where is your data, right? Where is your enterprise data sitting? And where is your majority of your workloads sitting? What I mean by that is your core services on which you're going to have integration on, whether they themselves are sitting on your on-prem data center or they're sitting in your cloud data center. Your latency constraints for certain kind of deployments which you have. The maturity and the skill set of both your on-prem team and the cloud team, right? There are organizations which have this mantra of cloud first. They want to get into cloud, but they don't have the skill set to deploy and manage instances on cloud. So we have to take into account those kind of things. Then comes regulatory needs and compliance, right? So for example, if you are in the healthcare, whether the cloud instances HIPAA certified, or if you're having PCI, whether you need PCI zoning and all those kind of things. And at the end of the day, it also boils down to cost, right? What I mean by that is, you might have additional hardware sitting on-prem compared to what you have on cloud, and how it gets measured and all those kind of things. So there are a lot of cost factors which also need to be taken into account before you decide whether you want to go between cloud and on-prem deployments. So the other thing which, Ram, you and we looked at, but when we looked at cloud, we looked at Cloud Hub, right? Especially when it comes to MuleSoft, the one thing which we looked at was the number of APIs to core saturation, right? Like how many APIs can I run on a single core, and the need for the specific APIs in terms of both compute as well as memory requirements, and how does that equate? So those kind of things basically drive the decision making between the on-prem and cloud.
Now that you brought up the 2 important factors are security, cloud security, on-prem security, and performance, reliability, and latency and all. So how do you address those challenges when you are developing integrations to achieve a business outcome, when you're building all APIs and integrations? And these are very common, right? Security comes to top of everybody's mind these days. How do you make sure that you secure all your assets, whether it's integrations or APIs or building blocks, whatever you want to call them? how do you secure them? How do you address them? What no procedures are no what policies that you would put in place, and how do you no overcome those challenges, governance challenges as well? Like it could be performance, it could be security, it could be reliability.
We actually
And
use API. Yeah, we used API Manager for API security and policies through that. We also had the firewall security. We also had the internal coding, so we cannot scan the code. We also, before any API is deployed to production, pen testing. So we had a third-party vendor engaged who was doing the pen testing for the APIs and data. So when I see security, it has to be multi-layer, because you cannot just rely on one layer. And that's how I kind of embrace that security, that it has to be, because at some point one layer could be broken. So there are multiple programs which kind of go into that one. HTTPS, TLS 1.2, API Manager policy, protected by firewall, which is always there. And then make sure that credentials are there as part of the token is part of your header, so that authorization, when I say. So both authentication and authorization is built into the API. And then at the end of the day, yeah, like it's kind of make sure that testing is done and there's no gaps there.
very good. And Sudarshan, I know you work very closely with the security team at SafeLight too. What were some of the things that they posed as challenge for integration team, and how did you manage that? Like, what were some of the steps that you took to convince the security team that we are covering all the bases there?
Sure. So when we were looking at the security for the platform itself, we basically broke it into multiple components. We broke it into the platform security. What I mean by that is, how do we access the anypoint platform itself? What are the controls around that, whether it is through single sign-on or using Okta or ADFS or whatever it is. The second thing was security around the APIs, and then the data which that API handles, right? So we basically have to look into all those three components, and then any other controls which you can put in front of your the runtimes, right? Whether it's a WAF, whether you're using an F5 APM, or you front it with Akamai or whatever it is to do bot protections or DOS protections and all those kind of things. So there are multiple things which go into consideration, and depending upon where you deploy, right? So that's another thing is it's a big factor, especially if you're doing on a cloud deployment. Again, it depends upon whether it is managed by the vendor or you are managing the instances. There are certain more options or less options you get based on where the deployment is. But in terms of security, as I said, like we at a high level, we broke it into three different components, right? The platform, so there were controls where they said, like, you have to have active directory groups which are tied to specific roles which need to get mapped. You cannot you have to have single sign-on into the platform. Those need to be audited, logged, make sure like those are there and available if you have any auditor come in. The second thing is on the API. Whether you're using OAuth, you're using basic auth, what is the infrastructure which can provide those kind of things. With MuleSoft, it becomes interesting as we were looking at using Okta as the OAuth provider, right? So the authn and the authz were happening within Okta. And then if you're having any sensitive data and API data, like do they get encrypted? And how is that handshake happening, and how is the data transfer happening? So again, with the other thing which basically came up is, like, even with Git, you had to have multi-factor authentication before you check in. So you were part of that group and you cannot check in anything. So there were controls around that, especially with when you hear things like SolarWinds, where your Git or your repo got compromised. You want to be more careful. And then make sure like you're constantly auditing, right, from a governance perspective. If What I mean by constantly monitoring and auditing is like if you have developers or users who have access to the systems and they are no longer there, make sure you purge them, you remove them, you remove the controls and all those kind of things. Bigger organizations have this audited in a very automated fashions. Like in banks, it happens every 6 months or 3 months. For smaller organizations where they implement, it might not be there. So implement those kind of controls. So make sure like everything is in place, which usually helps.
Nice, nice. I know it's a vast topic that we can go on, no, but I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure we give some
You
kind
need
of
to have a.
insight. Go ahead,
Sorry, no.
Vikas.
I was just saying that you need to actually have a security program in your company, you know, work with security experts, and they'll help you design that for your API management program. Like what are the standard, because it's very specific to each company, whether it's a banking, finance, whether it's healthcare. There are a lot of regulation standard as well there, which will, so your security and compliance and privacy team will help you select the right tools, the right standards and frameworks.
Right. The key point that I'm taking away from this discussion is security at different levels, right? Whether it's data security at rest or in transit, or securing the APIs or securing the platform access. So it's at multiple levels that you have to think on top of the regulations. So I mean, anybody venturing into integration space or no APIs, I think they'll have to consider all this. It's not about having uh, secure access to the platform itself, right? You need to build security around your APIs, your integrations through policies, OAuth, client ID secrets, and also secure the data in transit, secure the transport, um, encryption. All that will come into picture. So awesome.
Yeah. And the last thing is that don't
Okay.
user ID and password in the code. I've seen developers doing that.
Okay. We are coming to the last question that I have. I'm sure this applies to everybody, right? When you start an integration project, when you start an API journey, whatever you want to call it, you may already have a lot of existing technology in your organization. Like you may be a Java shop, you may be a Microsoft .NET shop. Um, you may be having plenty of microservices and other integrations already developed. So when you buy a MuleSoft like a product, how do you manage the transition, right? Do you do a lift and shift of everything that you have, or do you try to integrate them? And let's assume that you have a Java program at your organization and you bought MuleSoft. What do? Do you convert everything into MuleSoft, or do you manage Java integration separately and MuleSoft integration separately by different teams? Like how do you manage all that? How do you bring everything into one umbrella? What's your experience and recommendation?
So the way we looked at that, we said lift and shift kind of would be more like you're kicking the can down the line. Like, yeah, you will just put it there, but then you challenges, you don't know where is there. There could be some security gaps, things like that. We said, okay, let's find out the top list, what is going to provide more value in terms of, and what is the technical debt. And we kind of selected project by project, and that's where we redesign and we build it with the microservices architecture. There were some cases where it has to be kind of ported because the product was going out of words and like runtime, those kind of things. We did use API manager as a proxy, so let's just proxy that existing API through the Mule API manager, but then come back, maybe a couple of months time and rewrite in the way it should be designed with the microservices architecture. So short answer, we did not lift and shift. We used a more redesign approach, and then needed the proxy, but then not to spend too much time and just, so that was another approach.
And Sudarshan, we have a term for that, no, putting lipstick on a pig. So that's what we call lift and shift. No,
Yeah.
you're still dealing with the same pig with a different lipstick, right? And the same problems
Yep.
exist if you do the lift and shift. So I will let Sudarshan share his thoughts, and before we conclude.
You basically stole my thunder. And yeah, at least my experiences, I would never recommend a lift and shift, right? Because there is no business value add until unless your organization has a lot of money and time to spend, resource to spend. Never do that because you just took one problem from one place and moved it to another. You just changed the technology, right? Whether it's Java, .NET, you just moved it to MuleSoft. The the recommendation which we usually, at least from an architecture perspective and an integration perspective, I would give is if you have a lot of integrations and one of your biggest pain is managing them, right? Start building proxies, bring all the management and governance under one plane. That's step one. And as you evolve and as you grow, make sure your new greenfield applications, or when you revisit a specific service, see if it makes sense to rebuild it on the platform, right? Easier said than done, right? You might have, I don't like to call it like a monolithic service, but let's assume that you have an enterprise service which does a lot of things. It might not make sense to just even redo it because of various complexities, right? There is a lot of things which need to go into decomposing even that service. Just don't do it blindly. Start with small, as I said, like bring all your integrations under one plane so that you have a better idea of what's there within your organization and how things are flowing, where the integration points are and how they're getting integrated. At the same time, any greenfield development start doing on the platform. And then come back and revisit either, as Vikas said, if they're coming to end of life, or if there is a major change coming in and you get the funds and the time to look into that service and decompose it into smaller chunks and develop on the platform. That would be my recommendation based on the experiences. Um, don't ever try to sell it this as a technology initiative because you're going to run into, um, I would say, run out of funds pretty quickly. And you probably are not going to get funding the next time.
All right, thank you so much. Yogesh, you want to add anything to it, or you have additional thoughts?
No, I agree with Sudarshan and Vikas comments. I mean, take advantage of new platform appropriately. Just don't move your existing integration lift and shift to other platform, or move from on-prem to cloud and expect everything is magically going to change for you.
Right. And
So,
yeah, very, very common scenario with a lot of leadership that I've seen, right? Because they want to, uh, I won't say it's a formality, but they want to prove something that, okay, if it's a cloud first approach, they want to move everything to cloud first before they redesign the applications for cloud, right? They want to take the applications as is, just move them to cloud. It's easy to do that. Um, just no, without even thinking what the repercussions are, no, what whether you need to redesign it for cloud or not. They don't, they think this is one of the options that they have, right? Do a lift and shift and then worry about redesigning the applications, so that they can they can check one thing off saying, okay, I've moved everything to cloud. So that may be one of the reasons why they do a lift and shift, but it's very common that I'm seeing with a lot of customers. Nothing wrong in doing that. It totally depends on what your priority is, right? Suppose if you are moving off of the infrastructure business, right? If you don't want to maintain and you have a time constraint that you have to move everything to cloud, for example, it makes sense to do the lift and shift right now and then worry about, because redesigning will take a lot of effort. You need to have good thought process in place. You need to make sure that you're doing it in the right way. So it won't be as simple as doing a lift and shift. So nothing wrong in doing a lift and shift, but it's a waste of money unless you are forced to do that. The approach that customers should take is redesign the application, no, use proxies, for example, and so on. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that's what we did at SafeLight too. we had a bunch of .NET APIs already lying around. We didn't want to redefine everything, rewrite everything in Mule. So we used a bunch of proxies to access those APIs, manage them in any point platform, but still use the existing APIs. And later on, when it comes to that point, we will rewrite them in Mule wherever it makes sense. Otherwise, there is no fun rewriting something just for the sake of doing it, right? So that should be the approach. And if you're moving from TIBCO to Mule, for example, and your contract with TIBCO is coming to an end, and you don't have enough time to do the reverse engineering and understand the requirements and then do the design in proper way, lift and shift is an approach that a lot of my customers have taken also. So, all right. With that, I think we are coming to an end for today's meetup. Let me stop sharing here. I want to look at the questions if there are any. Any questions from anyone? I don't see here.
We had a few questions. I was just answering.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Any outstanding question that Vikas and Sudarshan can answer? Anything? I didn't look at the chat until now, so I don't know what's out there.
So there is a question like they want to know the cons of MuleSoft. Not only pros, they want to know the cons.
Yeah, it'll be good from your experience, Vikas or Sudarshan, right? What are the challenges that you see with the product that's not doing, or no, whatever it may be, right? In your experience.
Yeah, I'll say that. Yeah, I have very hands-on experience with that. So in terms of developer platform is awesome, documentation is good, and you're ready to build. And what I've noticed actually working with the senior tech leads and developers, when it comes to triage and debugging tools, like when the API is running, like a live debugging or live environment, that's the feature. I think it's coming up now, but I don't know, it was not there at the beginning. So I know there's a MuleSoft monitoring product is there now, but initial days we had problem like whether it's going out of heap, out of memory. Those are the challenges which we faced. Then you have to go and put a ticket, then some support person will come. So we kind of lose a lot of time in that back and forth ticketing and those kind of things. I would say that was one of the challenges which we faced sometime, and especially when the resources are running low, because you don't know, you just select a core, it's a 0.2 or 0.4 of, but you don't know what is there, how much 0.4 is, how many threads are there. Let's just say you have application which runs on 2000 threads per minute, but you don't know, there's no math there, there's approximate, but each resource is different. So it takes and that exact math. How many resources you allocate? You just learn, you try and learn.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to performance, performance is definitely not documented in any technology or anyway. It's an art, right? It is totally use case driven and data driven, right? It varies from environment to environment, and you have to come up with optimal settings. And it's one of the common asks from the customer. Many of the customer support tickets, if you analyze them, they talk about performance as one of the most challenging problems that they have. They think, okay, I'm running in one core, I'm running 80 applications in a single core. How do I manage the performance? My SLAs are going for a toss, and batch applications are taking more time, more memory, so you need to understand your batch application and real-time applications cannot coexist in the first place because they compete for the resources. And if they can do time share, then it makes sense. But if you don't have a control over that, it becomes a challenge. Rather than blaming the product, right? I think they should look at how they're using the product also. In some of the cases, it's just an education thing that's lacking. And with new products like Titanium Monitoring, Visualizer, we have made a lot of improvements in helping with debugging, and you can pinpoint the actual issue, the line of code that's causing the issue also in many cases. So as you're right, the project has matured big time from now where it was a few years ago. So there are lot more features now to troubleshoot the issues. Um, I mean, as a customer, I thought the performance was one of the challenging problem for me when I before I joined MuleSoft, when I was implementing Mule, because lack of visibility. Right now, I do have that visibility. I get there are proper tools that I can run to gather the statistics. If it's an on-prem installation, support as a support tool, which we call it the support tool, I believe. You can implement, you can run the tool. It collects all
Support
the metrics
collector.
for you.
Yeah,
Support
support
collector.
collector. Yeah.
Right. It gives you all the metrics that you need to pinpoint the issues that you may have with the threads or CPU or memory. So, and also visualizer can help you with pointing the actual piece of flow which is causing a bottleneck. Use all the features wisely to improve your performance and monitoring aspects. Yogesh, you are about to say something, or
No, I was just going to mention about Titanium offering and the additional features that are added over the last couple of years
right.
to provide enhanced debugging capabilities, whether it is log aggregation available right in the platform or taking advantage of advanced monitoring capabilities, which exactly tells you, hey, whether your application is running out of threads or memory. And oftentimes now we also exactly point out which flow is the culprit. And you can
Right.
also take advantage of open source tools, right, whether it is visual VM or Java flight control to do more deep dive type of debugging, to look at heap dump and thread dump and take advantage of that.
And also on top of the flow level monitoring, you can also have a connector level monitoring too. It can, in a flow, if you have multiple connectors, it can exactly tell you which connector is no consuming resources, how much resources,
Mhm.
and where the bottleneck is. So it's easy to debug these days. Definitely know an improvement over the years.
Very good.
Thank you.
Sudarshan, I know you have a lot of complaints, but you don't need to keep.
It's not. I have complaints. Not on the product per se, but going back to the question in terms of what are the cons when you go in front of the leadership, right? The platform itself and MuleSoft itself brings a lot of value. I was very pessimistic when we brought in. Ram knows this because I always like to question um, and see what value it adds. It does add a lot of value to your organization. Having said that, one of the things which I would call out, there are a couple of things which I would call out. When you go in front of the leadership, especially if you like MuleSoft and you want to bring in MuleSoft, what they need to understand is it is like any other platform, any other tool. There is a learning curve. So it's not, even though it has a lot of drag and drop features, you can bring in connectors, add, it makes your life easier. There is a learning curve. Make sure your team is well equipped, well trained on the platform. So it's not magic, right? So there are things which need to happen. You have to put in a little bit of effort there. The second thing is, as I said, like it is a platform, it is a development, there is a development side to it. So if you want to have proper governance, proper control, make sure you build a solid CI/CD pipeline. That is where you have to spend some time. It is no different whether you use Java, MuleSoft, or .NET. You have to use the same basic principles. You cannot get away from it. Just because it's a platform, it gives you a lot of capabilities. One of the things which I have seen, similar to what Ram was talking about, cloud first, what I've seen with MuleSoft, or not just with MuleSoft, even in my current with other tools, is the assumption from the leadership is that, hey, I bring in the tool, now everything, it goes from 2 weeks to a day, right? Magic happens. That is true in terms of you get a bigger, higher productivity, but then you would get chaos also along with it. So make sure like the leadership understands, and that's where the sales side of the persona within us have to come, where we have to counter sell what's being sold to them, right, from a marketing perspective. So keep that in mind. Again, not every tool is perfect. Mule is growing. The other thing is, like I think Ram mentioned, is like some of the struggles which we had in terms of the cons of like how they are licensed. They are licensed by code. So if I want to do core pinning, it was not available. I think they have introduced core pinning lately, which is good. So you have to know the product a little bit to be able to present it properly in front of leadership. It's like, okay, what are we subscribing to? What are we buying? So that they understand the cost, the total cost of ownership, both from a platform perspective and from a support perspective.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Anything else before we conclude? I know it's late. It's 8 o'clock already, 8 p.m. EST. Thanks to everyone for staying late, and those who are joining from India. I think it's an odd hour for you guys, but anyway, thanks so much for making this a successful one. And thanks to Sudarshan and Vikas for sharing your experience and answering all the questions patiently.
Yeah.
Very valuable. And this session will be recorded and will be available in YouTube as well. If you want to share it with your leadership, and then you can also share it with other customers, your colleagues who could not join today.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Can you send the recording so that
Yeah, definitely. I will share the. It's going to be available in Meetup site, and then we will give you the link to it. Naresh is actually putting together a YouTube channel for this, so he will share the links.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naresh. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you.
Yogesh.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Vikas and Sudarshan. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
I'm going to stop recording and.